It's about time we were recognized for something we do so well.
The Simpsons will be right back.
Well, let me put it this way. You ever been to the dentist?
Yeah?
Not me. I suppose I should go to one. But I got enough pain in my life as it is.
Alright. Hey everybody, it's Dev Animations. I'm here with a really awesome guest I'm really excited to talk to. She's the iconic communist who's been in this space for a really long time. She talks about veganism. She has the Vegan Vanguard podcast, which you should really check out. And generally her stuff's just a cut above the rest. It's Mexie, everybody.
Oh man, what an introduction. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So we're going to talk about a lot of different topics, but I want to kick it off with just something fun. We're going to talk about veganism, the bourgeois bullshit, why a lot of people only see it that way, and also just, you know, what is a genuinely dialectical veganism that is about our relationship to the world, that isn't just about, oh, I eat this food, it doesn't have meat in it. It's like, no, it's bigger than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that people are now talking a lot more about anti-speciesism and not just veganism. And I actually did a podcast recently with an amazing, another plural justice, like vegan, anti-capitalist activist, Menika Repka. And she was talking about the difference between anti-speciesism and veganism as in a diet or a consumer choice or that kind of thing. So, I mean, I've made videos about like why veganism as a consumer choice is just problematic, but I feel like if people are listening to this on this channel, they probably already know why in terms of like the capitalist reasons why it's not great. But yeah, so in terms of anti-speciesism, like anti-speciesism looks at the system of speciesism and how it's tied to white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, etc. So if you're going to be truly anti-speciesist, then you can't be like pro-white supremacy or something like that, right? Because these are all intimately intertwined. And so if you're going to fight anti-speciesism as a system, then you have to also fight the other systems that it's embedded with. And in whatever way that looks like. But so like, you can be vegan in terms of eating a vegan diet and just consuming things that are vegan, but not be anti-speciesist, because you could still be like sexist, racist, like homophobic, all this other stuff. You could be actively upholding systems that exacerbate speciesism, or you could be pro-capitalist, and like there's really no way that capitalism is compatible with anti-speciesism, because even if everyone was consuming perfectly vegan within this growth-based capitalist economy, you would still have these vegan companies encroaching onto the habitats of wild species or contributing to climate change, which is also killing wild species, right? It's still this like colonial ethos of like pioneer mentality, like come in, take, and then move on kind of thing. And that's just not going to jive with anti-speciesist action. So yeah, you can be vegan, but not anti-speciesist. And similarly, you can be anti-speciesist, but not eat a fully vegan diet. And I think for me, this really rings true with like indigenous people who might live like more traditional livelihoods, like, and actually live off the land, because it's like, they are not supporting speciesism in terms of, you know, the way that it manifests under white supremacy and colonialism and all the rest. But to them, you know, animal liberation doesn't preclude ever eating an animal. And I think for a lot of like mainstream vegans or like capitalist vegans, that's really hard to digest, pun intended. But you know, but you could also be anti-speciesist, but not eat perfectly vegan for a number of other reasons. Like maybe you don't have the means, maybe you live in a food desert, maybe you have an eating disorder or some other kind of thing that means that it's not right for you to consume perfectly like that. It's too much. So yeah, I think like making those distinctions is really useful. And then once you do that and you can like fully dive into what anti-speciesism really is and like what speciesism is and how it relates to other oppressions, it's so fucking interesting. Like I personally, have you read Aphorism and Racism is Zoological Witchcraft? Yeah, so I just love really good read. Yeah, everyone check those out. So yeah, I just love the connections between like speciesism and humanization and basically like white supremacist colonialism, and how like who is defined as human under this society, under this capitalist system, is basically like a cishet, white, able-bodied man. And then the further you go away from that ideal, the more you can become animalized. And if you can become animalized, then basically like that just legitimizes anything that can be done to you, because anything can be done to animals, right? Like animals are just property, or they're vermin, or they're whatever. We can do whatever we want with them. So yeah, I mean, once you kind of see those links, and I always recommend reading like Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And like, this isn't a vegan book, but I think that kind of the shift in like ethos and worldview that she's proposing would really shift from one that is like colonial white supremacist speciesist to one that is more liberatory and honors the relations that we have with other species, and the relations that we have with the earth and with each other, like as animals. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of like a dialectical veganism, I mean, I still do think that if you do have the means, and it's not too like arduous for you, like I do encourage, I guess, consuming vegan as much as is possible and practicable, even under this system, because it's not just about the consumption itself, it's also about like, yeah, the mindset we have, the ethics that we have, or like the way that we want to live our politics. And if our political stance is that animals should not be commodities for us to consume and should not be exploited institutionally and systemically, then it makes sense for us to try to not participate in that, because like it's just all this stuff about like, oh, well, once we end capitalism, and it's just like, once we end capitalism, everyone's not going to magically just be like, oh man, speciesism is pretty bad, right? Like, let's stop exploiting animals. Let's, it's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. So yeah, it has to be kind of both.
I'll say the same.
But
we do live in a society.
We live in a society, yeah. God, yeah. So it's just, yeah, I just feel like that's a huge cop-out. Like it's a huge, oh, I'm just not going to do anything, or I'm not going to think about this any further or take any responsibility for how I benefit from speciesism as a system. Because like speciesism is also really tied up with like anthropocentrism, which is a really problematic idea that's at the heart of like white supremacy and capitalism. That basically the world and nature and animals are here for us to exploit. And yeah, we have like dominion over that, as opposed to living in reciprocity with everything else that we have relationships with. And, their lives do matter. Like we don't have the right to control them, cage them, manipulate their bodies in really messed up ways in order to serve our desires. And like, I think a big way this is kind of going up right now, like I just actually finished a script about like COVID and animals and what's been happening with slaughterhouse workers and things like that. And I mean, this has just shown how horrible our whole consumer, like our meat-driven industrial food system is, because on the one hand you have like all these workers who are already mistreated and like so much, and they're dealing with
just to add to that, it's not always the case, but usually in the direct act of like the slaughterhouse and everything like that, usually again they're lower income, they're usually immigrants, and they're usually persons of color. Like it's a very specific kind of industry.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, because it's such dangerous and terrible work that they're doing. So yeah, if they're undocumented migrants, that can't complain about it, then like all the better, right? Because then like they can't bring up how terrible this stuff is in the public eye. And then there's all these like ag-gag laws and stuff like that, so they can't do it anyway. But you know, they're suffering like amputations, they are suffering so many different health issues and, you know, death as well on the job. Yeah, so they were all getting sick from COVID, obviously, because the working conditions are such that like nobody can social distance. It's just a hotbed for disease. And they're also being exposed to like, what's it called? Antibiotic resistant bacteria strains as well. And they're at greater risk for getting like, you know, influenza, avian flu, swine flu, that kind of thing.
The idea that like, if you want your good meat, you have to have that meat cleaned and have all these different drugs pumped into them. So you create these super viruses. And who's going to get affected by that? The workers.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, so anyway, they were all getting sick and a lot of them were dying because of COVID. So they shut down these meat plants. So then we had basically shortages of meat in the supermarkets and the restaurants that were still open or whatever. And meanwhile, you know, people are losing their jobs. Like they're finding it hard to even access food. They're lining up at food banks due to COVID, economic fallout. And at the very same time, we have all these farmers across America who are then but they have to just kill because they're still breeding the animals for some freaking reason. Like, they have to kill all these animals because they can't send them to the slaughterhouse. And so they're just like, and oh my God, I'm just reading some horror stories about this, like about what they have to do and like the toll it's taking on their mental health and all this stuff. Although I'm kind of like, well, is it really better to just raise the animals and then send it off to some other like more hyper exploited worker to do the job for you, you know? Like, is that psychological? Obviously it is psychologically better, but
there's honestly no win. It's like these animals are gonna get slaughtered either way, and it's like, cool, either sad farmer can do it or like really detached like industrial worker can do it.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so just like absolute horror stories of like what's going on there, and it's ridiculous. I mean, I think that just exposes so much of what's like fucked up about this like meat-driven, profit-driven system. Because I mean, the reason that there's so many that they have to kill is because they've been bred to grow up to size in such a short amount of time. And if they get to be too big, like the slaughterhouse workers it's already very unsafe for them, and they're already suffering from repetitive stress injuries and like I said, like losing arms and hands and things like that. So if the animals get too big, it's too much of a safety risk for them to like hoist them up to the kill lines. Yeah.
It's like talking about the meat industry is like, yeah, that thing we have that's totally not insane, and like
I know, and I'm trying like it's so hard to talk about this stuff. Like, to me it sounds like this is crazy, you know what I mean? Like, I can't believe this is happening, but I don't know, it doesn't seem to have an impact on a lot of like people who are leftists too, right? And it's just like, don't you think this matters? I don't know, this seems kind of fucked up.
And again, if it's used on animals, what else is it going to be used for? I mean, we have this infrastructure, so it's like, I mean, you wonder where like a lot of these violent regimes come from. It's like they have additionality in the regime because it's like there's structures of violence. It's going to be used on animals, or it's going to be used on people, or both. Wasn't it that like in the Holocaust they actually used technologies that were developed in the animal agriculture industry, and then in turn animal agriculture took from what was, I guess, used or done in the Holocaust. Like, these things do have real world material effects in terms of like, structures of violence and like societies of violence. But yeah, the fact that they're commodities that are bred to go up to size so quickly, and then after that it's like, oh, well, I guess like there's nothing to do with you other than kill you. And they're being quote unquote composted. They're just being trucked over to these like huge lots that health officials have leased out. And then they have a cleanup crew, which like I only assume is, again, like poor workers, marginalized workers. And these people have to shove these bodies into a wood chipper, then spread them out on these like compost heaps. It's just absurd. Like, in terms, it's like
just like, what is happening? Like, I don't know. And then meanwhile, yeah, there's shortages of quote unquote food in the stores, and it's like, is this not time to like change this? And the reason that they can't keep them around and whatever as well is because as soon as these these animals are grown, there's always a new generation that's right behind them. So it's like there's no time, you know. Anyway, it's just sick. I kind of went on a tangent there about how gross.
Like we're that's like the mood. It's like, yeah, so I don't eat meat. And then like 3 seconds later, it's like, yeah, and that's why they killed thousands of them.
Yeah. And then there's wood chippers. Yeah.
One thing I did want to talk about is just that I think, because you did it in your veganism TM video, just the idea that there is this vegan idea, and I think the best example of it is in Scott Pilgrim. The idea that, like, yeah, if you deviate from the vegan diet, you are no longer the vegan, you have lost your privileges.
Yeah.
And all of
yeah.
And it's like, speaking from personal experience, like, sometimes you don't have the money like that. And that, like, you can get the fruits and vegetables, and you can have the meals and stuff like that. But sometimes you're just in a space where it's like, there aren't really vegan options, and I'm not going to just eat fries, or like...
No, exactly. Yeah, like, it's just ridiculous to be like, that's just treating veganism as some kind of like weird like religion almost, where it's just like, here's all the rules and you must follow all the rules and then you will be a good vegan. And it totally ignores the fact that it's like, okay, there's a lot of people out there that are consuming 100% vegan, and in fact it's rising. Like I think there's more people who are vegan or at least vegetarian today than ever before, but we're also killing more animals than we ever have in all of human history. Like all of these vegan people consuming perfectly, following all the rules, hasn't actually put a dent in that, right? And yes, our population has increased, but like the rate at which we're killing animals is increasing, disproportionately to the rate of increase of our population. So like following all these rules obviously isn't enough to actually save the animals. Like, it's saving some animals in terms of like, it's not less are being bred or whatever, but all the ones that are being bred are still being killed, you know? So it's just really ridiculous.
The beginning process of the market, which is, hey, we need to make a surplus. And that there's always going to be a surplus. So even if you don't eat meat, like, they're still making meat to be produced in the market. And if you don't eat it, they're just going to throw it away. So no matter what, it's a waste in some way.
Yeah. Or they'll find a new market for it, like somewhere else or whatever too, right? So that's not to say that like there's no value in consuming vegan. Like I just said, like there certainly is, and I would definitely argue for it. But the people who get so hung up on like, oh no, I'm not vegan anymore because I like ate a cracker that had milk product in it, like accidentally, you know, it's just like, what, are you kidding me? Like, how is that helping the animals? How is that hurting the animals that you just ate that cracker? Like, do you think that had any tangible effect on the animals at all? And it's just treating it like this weird set of rules. It's classist, you know. It's probably racist. It's like, it's just not.
I feel like that's the mood now. It's just like, it's classist, so it's probably racist.
It's definitely probably racist, you know. Let's be serious. So yeah, it's not paying attention to like the different reasons why that might not be possible, or why it's unreasonable to just like flip your shit about like one consumption choice if otherwise you are an anti-speciesist activist, and you know, for the most part you are consuming in line with your politics. Like, what one little consumption choice, as if that makes any difference, you know? I think people just get scared because it's like, you know, I don't know, meat eating and all of that is just so, I don't know, the way our society treats it is just kind of ridiculous and like super glorified, you know? So people are afraid that it's like, well, if you slip up, if it's okay that you do this sometimes, then like you're gonna just jump off the wagon and like do it all the time or whatever, you know? And it's like, well, in that case, then you probably don't care that much about anti-speciesist action, do you? You know what I mean? But like, yeah, like, and again, like I said, like, you don't have to consume perfectly to still be anti-speciesist and to still fight for that in your activism, which I think is far more important. Like, if we're going to take down these systems, like, we got to take them down, right? So, and you're not going to do that just because, like, whatever, you know, like, oh no, I ate some crackers that weren't vegan. Now I've ruined everything, you know?
You turned in your phone.
Yeah, exactly. People would just like not tell anyone about it either because they'd be so ashamed, you know? It's just like, who cares?
Like their confessions, like, I'm sorry, I had
Yeah,
a piece of a cheese pizza. I can't be vegan anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, like people don't think, especially if it's like something that's like people have already purchased this. Like I understand it's like if you do have the means and you're like at the store and you're like, oops, I like bought a pack of bacon when I didn't need to and then I ate it, like oops, you know what I mean? It's like, well, you didn't need to do that. Like you probably still could be an anti-speciesist and do activism around that, but like yeah, that didn't really need to happen. But like if things have already been purchased and you're not like you're not contributing to there being like less demand for that because it's already purchased and like out and unwrapped and stuff like that, it's like how is that having any effect?
I think the only thing I would say is that I still don't eat meat. I feel like that's definitely the trade I'm on at this point. Like
I know, me neither. Yeah.
That's the one. It's like I feel like obviously you don't become less vegan if you eat meat, but that's definitely like I don't think my body could genuinely like put meat in mouth and be like, this is good. I'd probably immediately be like,
oh no. No. It's become too strange for me. I think like the longer you go without it, the more it doesn't become food to you. And if like it was in my mouth, I'd be like, oh my God, like there's like a dead body in my mouth. Like I would just be like, oh God, like, you know, like I can't think of it as like food. It would be like, what is going on here? Like there's a dead bird on my tongue.
I have to be like stuck on an island. There's no like eatable flora. And it's just like, look, nutrients to survive. But outside of that, I'm like, nah, I'm good.
No, I know. That's definitely something. Like if I accidentally, or if I eat something that it's like, oh, this cake like was made with an egg, I'm like, oh, no, I don't go out of my way to like go buy cakes that aren't vegan. But like if I end up eating something that is like that, I'm not gonna like, I don't know, shit my pants. But like, you know, yeah, I definitely wouldn't eat like if something had meat in it. I definitely, if I ate that like accidentally, I would like feel really gross, or like spit it out.
One thing I did want to bring up, because I do think it's important, and just kind of the aesthetics of veganism, is how there is a very bourgeois idea of veganism. I think Gardein is a great example. The idea that veganism can take on kind of the aesthetics of the pre-existing market. So you can be vegan without really giving anything up. And I think in its worst extremes, you have things like the IDF and how Zionism uses veganism as a way to very much legitimate their own settler project, which does tie into the whole idea that like, as an analysis, veganism is not just what you eat, it's consumption. And settler colonialism and consumption can very much project itself as a moral good. If you look at America, you have that with Manifest Destiny. You know, we're taking this land for our own conquest and our entitlement to it. And in the case of how veganism is used under Zionism, it's very much that this is the superior diet of the superior people who are doing the most progressive, westernizing, like this is the future people. And so when you put that next to the Palestinian people, it's like, oh, well, who deserves to live here?
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's so damaging. It's really, really damaging, especially because a lot of people who are principled leftists will look at these kind of bourgeois manifestations of it and just kind of write the whole movement off as being bourgeois and being linked to so many problematic things, or being classist and things like that. And so it's really, really damaging because people will use that to be like, oh, well, I'm not going to go vegan. Like, it's not something that's relevant to the workers, even though it very much is, you know. Oh, I'm not going to go vegan. Like, I think some people will even like tokenize people who can't maybe afford or maybe live in a food desert or whatever. And it's like, because they can't go vegan, I won't go vegan. You know what I mean? Or not even go vegan. It's just like, there's such a, again, like focus on consumption. It's like, because they can't consume perfectly vegan, I'm not going to incorporate anti-speciesism into my activism. You know what I mean? Or I'm not going to care about animal liberation and then the links between that and human liberation simply because consuming perfectly vegan isn't accessible to everyone in this current system. It's like, that doesn't make sense though. Like, those two things don't follow. But yeah, like the bourgeois representation is just like absolutely terrible, and it's definitely the worst with like the IDF, and it's honestly so annoying and upsetting that like when I first went vegan, you know, I was following a lot of like the mainstream people who were, you know, mostly like, I guess, white, like women, you know, who were just like showing their foods and stuff. And like, I obviously like, I'm not surprised that a lot of them, but like, it wasn't even just them that like went on these Israeli tours. Like there were people of color who went, yeah. And there were people who like weren't totally focused just on diet or whatever. Like they tried to make it a bit more inclusive, but they still went on all of these like tours hosted by Vibe Israel to go and like basically just do a PR stunt of like how awesome and progressive and vegan Israel is to like vegan wash their apartheid, you know? And it's super disappointing because I don't know, there's just not a lot of like mainstream understanding of like what's going on, and like that kind of stuff is so damaging because like anyone who is in the know looks at that and is like, holy fuck, you know, fuck veganism. It's the same with like gentrification and stuff. People are just like, oh, fuck vegans because like they're gentrifying the city or whatever. And for me, I'm like, yes, gentrification is fucking terrible, and like unfortunately a lot of the times like it is vegan restaurants and stuff that are like a sign of gentrification, but like at the same time, I don't know, I'm speaking for Toronto anyway, like at the same time a lot of the times like gentrification is marked by these like weird like gastropubs that sell really weird meats and stuff. Like I don't know, it's just like these like niche things where it's like, oh, you can get like ox at this gastropub or whatever, you know. And like
I'm sorry, that's really funny Canadian thing I would expect. Just like, oh yeah, these special meats, because I feel like they're definitely in like Canada where it's like it's French masculinity, so it's like, no, look, I'm the huntsman. Like these are in the wild and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh, would you like some venison or whatever? You know, like so there's like kind of like equally that kind of stuff is involved in gentrification. But I'm not like letting vegan restaurants and stuff off the hook as being part of gentrification. But I also feel like gentrification is a process that is, you know, based primarily around like capital and capital flight and capital reinvestment and things like that. And it's like it happens regardless of whether or not like vegan companies are moving in. Like a whole host of different kind of companies move in during like that kind of a process, and it's like fucking horrible, you know. But it's not necessarily like, oh, veganism is doing this, you know. It's just that like, yeah, in the bourgeois manifestation, a lot of like hip city people are like, oh, I want to be vegan because it's like it's a look, you know what I mean? And so that ends up contributing to gentrification, which is, again, like terrible, but I'm like, I don't know. Yeah.
Is that like, it's not that they're vegan, it's because they have a class interest and that they're doing like neocolonialism. Like,
yes.
They could be any type of ideology or
exactly
consumer, but that when it comes down to why they're there, here's a business opportunity and I see it as a way to make money. But the thing that can obfuscate it in the same way that we use, like, or not us, but like people online use the term SJW. It's a way to just obfuscate who are the bad consumer types versus the ones that don't really.
Yeah, exactly. And it is unfortunate because it's like, well, like, it's like a lot of people in the city, you know, they see what's going on with climate change. Maybe they've like learned a bit more about animal agriculture and sustainability. So like there is that market there. So when people are moving into these spaces and thinking about business opportunities, they're like, oh, well, there is a market here. If I wanted to do some like upscale vegan stuff, like people would probably pay for it. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword kind of. Or that's not a good metaphor, but it's just, it's something.
it's definitely the being trapped in that capitalist regime puts it in the space of like, well, there is a better alternative. It's just, it's still capitalist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, and then it's like, yeah, what are you really doing to contribute to moving away from climate change, like going to like an upscale restaurant that like probably has a huge environmental footprint or whatever. Although I guess it's like, well, if I'm not eating meat at this restaurant, then it is a hugely less environmental footprint, but still.
Yeah. Again, they're not turning like a business district into one giant like community farm that sells like goods and services and like
Yeah.
the community helping the homeless. It's like, no, that's like the community.
Yeah. Oh my god, that would be awesome. But yeah, no. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Was there anything else you want to talk about veganism? Because I think the only other thing I was going to mention is just how a lot of fast food places are doing veganism too, as a way to kind of add revenue. So like Carl's Jr. has their Impossible something. Oh no, they have Beyond Beef. I think it's Burger King that has the Impossible Burger. So they're like a lot more bigger businesses are like, hey vegans, we have this for you. We have this.
Yeah. And I mean, like, hey, it's like good in a pinch. Like if I'm going on like a road trip or something and there's just like, I'm on this, one of those like route stops or whatever, and there's nothing but like a Burger King Impossible Burger. I'm like, all right, well, I'm glad this exists. But yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be cynical. Like obviously these corporations have contributed to so much destruction of, you know, the environment, so much neo-colonial exploitation of like workers elsewhere, and this is just like one addition to their revenue stream, right? Like they don't really give a shit that it's like, no, they don't care at all that it's like, oh, maybe this is gonna help animals. Like they're not trying to help animals, they're just trying to make more money, and they know that like, hey, maybe there's a market for this, and like we should get on board, especially if they know that like people are increasingly wanting to choose plant-based options because of climate change and et cetera, then like, of course, they're not going to not offer that. Otherwise, they're going to lose out on a huge revenue stream. So,
and it's also really funny because it's like everything else on the menu is like, here's a meat patty with something, and it's like, cool.
Yeah. Here's like double meat patty with like cheese and like bacon for a bun. You know, it's just like all this weird stuff. But like, here's this one vegan burger, so there you go. Or sometimes it's like, there's, I think, I don't know which company it was, but it's like, oh, we have something vegan on the menu now, and it's honestly like a tiny little sealed salad, which is just, look, it's just like, why would I buy this like not fresh at all salad from you? Like, I don't know.
Box is just like a chicken, but it has like cheese and egg in it. You're just like, listen.
Yeah, you're like, okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, it's hard not to be cynical. But hey, I mean, I'm glad that I can buy stuff at more like mainstream places now. But
because otherwise it would have just been like, I'll have some fries, and just be
yeah, exactly. It's just been like, fuck this. Usually I would just like I would like stay up late the night before like packing like a whole cooler so that I would not like be caught in that situation, you know, which is like a lot of work. So.
Meal prep, that's the thing though, when you do vegan meal prep, you feel so proud later. You're like, this is...
I know. I know, exactly. I love like going places and like having stuff like prepared in my bag, and when they're just like, we don't have anything vegan, I'm like, don't even worry about it. Like, I've got it. I'm like, that's why I bought this whole bag full of great stuff, so whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and we'll talk about other stuff too, but I don't want to make it too long. I did want to get to something I think is important, especially in left-wing spaces online, is a lot of people kind of don't know this, that there used to be other people on the YouTube who were leftists, who vaguely organized, and that the spectrum was you either had like someone like Jason and Ruhe, who like, he made his videos, and like there were people who followed him, he kind of made videos with other people, so like someone who just does their own thing, and then like kind of to the side of that you have indigenous activists, black activists, just people who make content that was left, and then on the other side, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you had these, I would probably say mostly under 25 people with like different meme avatars who would talk about leftism kind of through conquest of bread, reading Marx, maybe a little Lenin, and some of them had actual connections to like the Baltic countries or just places where communism really did affect regions, but that it was still very online, very meme-like, very influenced by the chants and stuff, and that's kind of the first attempt at building a left. And I just kind of wanted to kind of chat about that, because that wasn't, I wouldn't say it's the best period of time, but it definitely showed that like this has happened before, and that what BreadTube is now is a more official brand of what leftism is now.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that, like, because you're saying, like, yeah, there was people, like, that group of people that you're talking about, which, like, I was kind of part of, like, I didn't have, like, a weird meme avatar or whatever, but, like,
Oh no, it's definitely a spectrum. You're not like.
yeah. So, yeah, I feel like I was definitely, like, a part of that, because, yeah, I was around when, like, Jason Unruh was, like, at his prime, and, yeah, I mean, it was a much different space at that point. Yeah, I mean, like, the audiences were a lot smaller, but yeah, it was a lot more focused on like communism. Like either ML. There were some anarchists as well. Yeah, it was a much like different space. It definitely wasn't like BreadTube TM, like the brand of BreadTube. There weren't like a ton of like big creators that would then like talk about each other, like behind their backs kind of thing, and like get views by talking about each other, as if that matters, you know what I mean, in like the grand scheme of things, right? It's just like, okay, because people come to the community and then they just see a bunch of people talking about each other as if like the personalities matter more than the actual leftism, you know what I mean? So I don't know. Yeah, like I've tried to like decenter myself like in my work so that it's not really like that. But yeah, and it's interesting and like unfortunate that it's just like, okay, there was this kind of like insular group, which was mostly white. And then there was like, Black people and Indigenous people also doing left content, but like there wasn't a lot of like dialogue, you know what I mean?
Atomized and spread out, and the ones that were organized, they were in orgs, so they knew each other.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, there wasn't like a ton of. I still feel like there's not really a ton of dialogue. Like recently, I've like through you and through a few other people, like I found so many amazing like Indigenous, Black, like people of color who are making amazing leftist videos, but like they're not considered part of BreadTube, or like there's not a lot of like interaction. I mean, there is more now. I mean, I see you getting like more involved with like critiquing like some of the people in the space and stuff, and there's more kind of like crossover. But yeah, like it's unfortunate, and like there is definitely like a disconnect between the people talking online and like work that's happening on the ground. And I mean, like part of that is like I do a lot of work on the ground that like I can't talk about and that like I don't want to talk about. Like
if you do work on the ground, it's very, I'm doing work, don't worry about it. Like
yeah, exactly, right? Like I'll tell you later, when, whatever. But so yeah, so I mean, I guess part of that is the disconnect just of like not wanting to talk about a lot of that stuff. But I do think there's a lot more that we can do to like direct people like who are consuming our stuff towards how do they start organizing where they are, like how do they meet people where they are and get involved with whatever they can, because I feel like it's great to give them kind of the class consciousness, but then I feel like if we just kind of allow them to like stay online and think that they're doing a lot of great work online, which is like, whatever, education, agitation, that is good work. That's really, really important. But like, if they're not then gonna somehow be connected to like community, I think that is like a huge problem that we're still kind of dealing with. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big things about it that's definitely changed from how it used to be is platforms like Twitch and streaming generally has changed the face of how people think of leftism, because previously it was very like, I think the best example of what it used to be like is, because it's still a thing people do, is the PragerU videos. It was very influencing, reactive to what the right is doing. That was kind of the baseline of a lot of it. I think the big thing you said that I think is really important is that it used to be very communist. Like it used to be more communist than it was kind of anarchist, and it was very ML in its perspective, but it was very solidly like having theory was very important, and being able to have these conversations about theory was important. Where now it's very because people stream and are just on all the time, it's very easy to be kind of caught in the kind of liberalism that a lot of people have, because a lot of these people are more focused on being there and being able to react instantaneously and having that back and forth with the audience in a way that the previous attempt at kind of making that space didn't really have.
Yeah, for sure. And like, you know, I'm glad to see like other perspectives. Like, I don't think we only have to talk about like ML or like revolution. Like, people can talk about more things, but like, yeah, I think in order to have more broad appeal, like, people either have to like water down kind of what they're saying, and I'm kind of guilty of this as well, because I try to think about like, well, who is my audience, you know? And if I'm trying to get people on board who are more liberal, it's like, okay, do I really want to, I don't know, put like Stalin up here in like a big like rivers, you know, like I don't think I want to do that.
I kind of want to make a video now that Stalin did nothing wrong, and it's just you explaining why Stalin was really cool.
Yeah, like that's probably not something, you know. And I mean, yeah, I mean, not that I would anyway, but yeah, you know, like, like I think that I don't know. I guess it depends on like this. I guess it depends on like what people's goal is like with their channel. And like, I appreciate a lot of like the anarchist work. Like I kind of like lean, I'm kind of like, I guess in the middle, but I do lean a bit more in a lot of ways to like a decentralized model, even though like I don't know. Yeah, not to get into all that. I'm just kind of, no, I'm happy for like a diversity of like perspectives, but I hear what you're saying in terms of, like, I don't think BreadTube as it used to be, ever would have like gotten this mass appeal to the point that like we would have like such big YouTubers, you know what I mean? Yeah, like somebody like, you know, I don't know, I'm not gonna name names, but like people who were very like explicitly like communist in all of their stuff and like talked a lot about like theory. I don't think that they would have like 100,000 subs right now, you know what I mean? So I don't know, I think it's like a delicate balancing act, because it's just like, well, we want to reach more people, right? But then we also want to like, so we want to like phrase what we're saying in ways that's like, it's going to invite people in. Then we also don't want to like trivialize messages that we really need to send, right? So
I think one really great balance, and it's actually a video I really appreciate, because I don't watch philosophy tube as much. But the video he did with the housing crisis, and he made it like a comic, that's honestly one of my favorite videos, and I like that you were featured in that. Because it's like, that's actually like, I feel like that's one thing that's really missing now that we do have like a bigger production value in this space, is that there's, and it's you can see a lot in less white spaces how production value has changed, how these messages go out, but like how I feel one big problem is in it becoming so personality focused, there's less of a focus on making the leftism itself palatable in the way that you would do with any kind of other media. So like the idea of using graphic arts, the idea of using like narrative and function like that really isn't a big part of how leftism is conveyed. And that every once in a while when it does show up, it's like, oh, that's really cool. But usually it's in the service of like, oh, this video game, or oh, this like movie or something like that. So it's like, I feel like on the one hand, it's really good that there are now more perspectives, the conversation's more broad, which means more people are joining. But I feel like one thing that has definitely kind of faltered, and that I would kind of like to, in my own capacity as like a content creator, but also like in other spaces, just having a more specific line politically, so that even when you do the thing where it's like, hi liberal, I'm nice, I'm not gonna hurt you, I just want to talk about a better way of life, it's done in a way where you're not giving up any of your positions, where you're not trying to minimize any of the importance of, hey, we still need to overthrow the U.S. empire, but I'm going to be nice about it, so you don't feel
yes. Yeah. No, I fully agree. Yeah, I think we definitely need to make sure that we're not like watering it down so far to the point that like our messages aren't actually being heard, or they're being muddled, like they're being, because like you could put out a message that you think is really like, oh, this is going to really draw people in, and if you're not very clear about like, your political project, I guess, then like it could be interpreted in any number of ways, right? And you notice that in the comment sections, right? So it's like, I agree, yeah, we do need to be more clear. And yeah, I would love to see more leftists talking a lot more about like decolonization and like US empire and things like that, because I don't see that being talked about in a way that's like really productive. I mean, in like, I guess, BreadTube TM, like I know that like non-white people are definitely having these conversations in ways that are like really productive, but
Definitely. I think the way I think about it is that it's definitely, you have the kind of BreadTube TM where it's very, you don't have to be white, but usually it's recommended, and that you come into this space and that posturing and anti-capitalism is enough to kind of get you in, and that you just kind of make a brand from there, versus kind of people who, like, whether they be theory nerds or whether they've been to different political organizations and they want to make videos, you have people who come into it where it's very clear that they're aware that there is a left online, but that they're here to make sure that, hey, here's the information. I want to make sure people are learning. I want to make sure people know that, like, we're in this together in a meaningful way, not in a, hey, left unity, we need to all hold hands and like, everybody get it. No, it's like, meaningfully, we need to have this political line that's going to be militant about, hey, we're not doing ableism. We're not going to put down people in this way. We're not going to do... And having militant lines on sexism, and like one thing I think is really important is just the conversation of violence, which that is a serious conversation, and just like people talk about capital, like talking about violence is one of those things that it takes an analysis, reading from Fanon or reading from anyone who has like that kind of analysis. And I feel like where the big clash comes from in regards to those two separations really is the difference between people who are doing leftism because they feel like it's a brand, a model, a kind of way to move forward in their life, in the way that a lot of people take on political identities in the West, versus people who are, they're already in this space where it's like, this is what I'm dedicating myself to. This is definitely like, I'm dying on the hill of being a leftist. Like,
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, I always appreciate, watching content from people who are like really engaged in struggle, because like, I mean, that gives you such a great perspective that like being a theory nerd or like, I don't know, being able to like analyze media in an anti-capitalist way, like, even though I think that's all useful and, like great work, I'm glad people are doing it. I just like, I think we don't hear enough, I guess, from like about like actual organizing, and like what that takes, and like security, and like violence at protests, and like how to use your privilege at a protest, and like how to do all that stuff. Like there's a lot of analysis of like what's wrong with capital or like the way that like, things are problematic or whatever, which is really, really important. But like, I don't think we're moving past the critique, and you're right, like there is, like it is kind of easy for a lot of people to come in, learn a few things about leftism, and then like make some videos and be like, look, I'm doing it, and that's great. I'm not going to discourage that at all. I think, the more voices, the merrier, but I feel like we do need to take that step further to be like, okay, like we're doing the critique. It's important that everyone's armed with this knowledge, but like, now what, like, how are we coming together? Like, where are we directing people's energies? Like what's next,
And one thing that's important when thinking about like putting out those ideas is, especially with YouTube, I think, because Twitter's whatever, Twitch is streaming, that's kind of its own genre. But specifically for YouTube, that if you're gonna make a video, you should consider what the medium is. That once that video's up, it's up. So is this gonna be relevant in the next 3 months? Can people actually look back at this? Is this going to have information worth talking about? And again, not every video and video content is necessarily in the same category, but understanding like the medium, I think, is really important. And I feel like one thing that I do think is kind of a detriment to the kind of building of online things, because I do think people should put their ideas out there, is a lot of people come into this space with kind of zero exposure to, hey, this is an actual medium. What are kind of the ideas of how this medium works? And so you have a lot of people who are just kind of figuring out what they want to do. And so they'll put in a lot of effort editing and kind of being part of these conversations and these discourses. And they'll kind of get stuck in that versus, hey, maybe video content isn't the best thing. Maybe a podcast is easier. Maybe even writing. And sometimes it's, because this is true, some people, maybe they're better at organizing than doing any of this online activism.
Yeah.
And sometimes people maybe you will really enjoy working in a community garden and just upkeeping that. Maybe you really will enjoy doing social investigation, even though that's more difficult now under COVID, but doing actual work might be far more interesting than recording yourself, being kind of awkward and kind of figuring how to edit, and then being like, okay, this is why the Joker is actually anti-capitalist. It's like, I get it, I appreciate the effort, but at the same time, you can go out and do stuff. You might be really good at it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And yeah, it's not that everyone shouldn't try and put their thoughts out there if that's what they want to do. But I think that on quote unquote BreadTube or whatever, in this space, we don't talk a lot about what are different options for people, and how can you maybe play to your skill set in a way that would contribute and be fulfilling to you, but isn't necessarily this space. I feel it's part of alienation as well. We're all so online, right? We all feel we have nowhere to go, and so we connect to each other on here. And so it feels if you want to be part of the discussion, then you have to be uploading these videos, or you have to be posting on Twitter, or you have to be doing this stuff. But there's so many different ways that you can contribute and organize and work to build a better future and build solidarity with people that I don't think we talk about enough, really. And I feel especially if we're bringing people in and they're kind of new and they don't know where to go, I think it's not great that we're not really providing any kind of advice or just talking about different ways that your activism could look, So, yeah.
But no, that's the most part. I don't really want to gossip on people.
I know. I was wondering. I was just I wonder what he's gonna bring up.
I feel there's really no one to gossip about in this video, because it's just you talk about one of these people and you're not gonna hear the end of it. It's not fun. So. We'll talk about something else. I think that the only other thing I'll say about it is propaganda is work, making content is work, and that when it comes to having these conversations from a leftist point of view, you have to have that point of view to start with. And just reading a book isn't enough. You have to really comprehend what that book is saying and relate it to your own experience. And to really grasp it, usually that means living that experience. So by the time you actually have a message, you'll know what it means and will have the kind of passion and conviction to put it out there. So there's a process to making a message versus just, I have an idea. Because it's good to get ideas out there, but if you have thousands and thousands and thousands of ideas versus a solid, concrete praxis, you're going to get bogged down what the regime wants, honestly. Just to kind of a lot of insecurity and not much confidence in one way or the other.
Yeah, and then you'll maybe end up and it's good for people to work through things publicly sometimes, but like you said about the medium of video, if you're kind of just putting out thoughts all the time, and then your thoughts end up changing so dramatically, but then people go and look at your old videos and it's that's not where you are. And not saying that that it has to be perfect, or that there's not value in seeing somebody's journey or whatever. But yeah, I do think it is important, to really think about I guess, what is your goal? If this is propaganda, right? So what is your goal with the propaganda? Who is your target audience? What are you hoping to achieve? What do you want to leave people with? Where do you want to direct them? Where do you think that they should be directing their energy? How can you assist them in doing that? Because propaganda, there's always a goal to this, right? So what is the goal? And if it's just oh, well, I'm a YouTuber, so I need to put out a video every month, and I'll just choose this topic and talk about that. You know what I mean? That's probably less effective, or like that's when it just becomes like, okay, this is just a career now, as opposed to like political activism. Because it's like there's this is what Ash said from the Horror Vanguard. Like there's a difference between being a YouTuber and being somebody who uses YouTube as a medium for their political activism, right? And I think like there's a huge difference there. And I feel like if you're really thinking about this as political activism, then like you do have to think like a bit bigger picture and like how you want to insert yourself and like what would be most effective in terms of like your skills, you know?
Yeah. So moving on from that, I honestly just had like a fan question. You've met Abby Martin before. How was that?
It was incredible. It was so incredible. I fucking love Abby. Yeah. I also love her brother Robbie. I love Mike Preisner. They're all like so great. I was really lucky because both of them ended up, Robbie and Abby ended up coming on the Vegan Vanguard. So I kind of like had it in there, and then me and someone else decided to host Gaza Fights for Freedom viewing in Toronto, and it went really, really well. It was like a huge success, and it was so cool to meet Abby and like hang out. And now I get to like talk to her sometimes, and it's like I'm just fangirling all the time. She's so cool.
I really love Empire Files. I got to meet her once. She did a talk at, I believe, UCLA. It was one of the UCs. They were having a talk about the DPRK, and they had different authors and different activists come together and just talk about like what's actually happening in the DPRK. And she was there, and she gave like a talk, and I actually got to ask questions and got to meet her afterwards, and so that was really cool. But no, I really appreciate like Empire Files. It's such a great series. And
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I love the series. I love Media Roots, her podcast. It's like my favorite podcast. I love Eyes Left, which is Mike Preisner, her partner, podcast. Fantastic. Like Abby's like gold. Like I want that energy. Like
you think it's the black hair energy?
Pardon me?
Black hair energy?
Yeah, it's gotta be. Like, it's just like, it's so intense. Like, it's just like, it's awesome.
That, and whenever she's on Empire Files, she always has her like killer suits, and it's just like, whenever she talks about anything, I'm like, we're doing it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. But like her on like Breaking the Set, like her on everything, it's just like, she just goes in, like, you know, it's just like, oh, it's so good. But anyway.
This one, it's kind of a fan thing. I really, really appreciate the episode of Vegan Vanguard you did with Catherine about sexual violence, because I know that's a really sensitive episode, and if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, we don't have to talk about it. But it's definitely
it's okay.
I feel like as a leftist topic, that's so important to talk about. I think one thing that does come up a lot in leftist space, especially if you're organizing, is that you do have to look out for fucking predators. You do have to look out for people who really are in the space for that very specific reason. And that like, I really do feel like if there's a topic that does not get talked about enough, and especially for younger people who just don't know as much, like, about these topics, like, it's so important to talk about. Like, no, we need to understand, like, power dynamics, like what is violence in these spaces, and like have a leftist understanding of consent, not just the bourgeois idea of what it is. And that episode was just really good and powerful, and I really appreciated it.
Oh yeah, I love that episode too. Thank you for saying that. Catherine is so amazing, and like I loved how just like raw and honest and everything she was with all of her experiences, and I completely agree. Like part of, I don't know, I get kind of frustrated sometimes because I do think that of all the oppressions that we talk about, like we tend to not talk too much about like patriarchy, misogyny, toxic masculinity. And I feel like there's been like a recent resurgence of like quote unquote brocialists, like just people kind of like uncritically bringing like toxic masculinity into the space, which is rooted in misogyny. and which like we do see playing out in on the ground activism. Like, yeah, I've been involved in spaces in Toronto that like, yeah, like we did have to deal with like abuse, and like people abusing their power, people, yeah, I guess, you know, holding on to toxic masculinity, like holding on to a system such as patriarchy that gives them a bit of power in this capitalist system, even though like we're all ultimately like oppressed as workers. It's like, there's a lot of work to do around that. And I feel like even a lot of leftists will be like, oh, well, like we've solved that. Like that's not really a big deal anymore. You know what I mean? And we kind of just like let our guard down and we don't really talk about that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, we don't talk about sexual violence. We don't talk about misogyny in general. We don't talk about, I don't know. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, thank you for saying that. That was, I really liked that.
No, just because like,
as well.
Like on personal level, like dude, like I really do try to make sure that like we talk about all violence. We can't just talk about the violence that's easy to talk about. Oh, racism. Here's black person being killed in a way that we can articulate. It's like no, like meaningfully, and especially in the conversation about men, regardless if they're white, because this is about men as a whole. Like men are socialized to do violence for the state, for the regime. They are socialized to very much participate in the system, and that not talking about that only makes the space more insecure for people in those spaces. Like you can know theory and you can know these ideas, but if you can't have that real interpersonal dialogue about, no, what is your capacity to really communicate not only your interests, but to actually listen to other people's interests and to actually empathize with them. And even beyond that, how to hold yourself accountable in those spaces. Because it all comes back to that relationship. And that most violence is about that inability to actually engage in that relationship and just to impose violence, to impose your ideas and will on others.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and that's why I wanted to make a video about fragility. And because I know, like, you know, that white fragility thing has been going around and people are just like, oh, this is like corporate diversity and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I mean, I haven't read the book, but like, yeah, that's crap. Like corporate diversity kind of stuff is not what we're aiming for. But I feel like in the process of writing off that book, people are kind of also writing off the idea that like fragility or accountability, you know, like self-accountability, self-crit, that kind of thing is important at all, because it's like, oh, well, that's not going to lead to a revolution. And it's like, no, like people learning to have a better relationship with themselves, learning to like decolonize their minds from all the systems that they've internalized, you know, doing that kind of a work is not going to bring about a revolution, but like it sure as hell is going to make you a much better comrade. It sure as hell is going to make you much better able to like be in these spaces and not perpetuate abuse, and, you know, listen to people and do work that is really constructive. And it's just going to make you a better organizer and comrade all around, you know. It'll make you be able to see, like, when you are out there doing work, to see where maybe like there is an issue that's arising. Like maybe we are allowing abuse to happen in this space, like we're not talking about it, or maybe we are perpetuating like different kinds of things that we're not really conscious of because we're not being conscious. Like we're not doing a lot of introspective work into ourselves and making sure that like we aren't being fragile and like we aren't like stalling the work. And, you know, like recently there was like a really great action in Toronto that like basically fell apart because there was just like a few key people who, just were not able to hold themselves accountable, and they kind of just like wrecked everything, you know? So like it happened.
Like in so much of actual organizing, it's the interpersonal bullshit that will ruin
Yes.
It's not like, I know people will make jokes about the FBI, the CIA, every government org. Most of the time they don't need that shit. Just the inability to be accountable to yourself, to your organization, and to your own abilities and your shortcomings. Like that shit'll destroy an org faster than any government agency.
Yep. Oh, hands down. Yeah, absolutely. Or like walking into a space and acting like you know everything and you're gonna like fight everyone on what they're saying and like talk down to the, you know, like that doesn't facilitate the work that needs to be done. So like in order to facilitate that work, you do need to do work on yourself and fragility and accountability and all that kind of stuff. So I just haven't really liked the way that the discourse has kind of moved from like, oh, you know, white fragility, the book is kind of bullshit, corporate individualist, to like, fragility is stupid and we shouldn't talk about it. You know what I mean? Because it's just like, yeah, of course we need to talk about class struggle, but like it's all connected. You know what I mean? Like this is something that will help the class struggle ultimately because it'll help us do the work.
Right. And the other thing too is like both with, because I think it's important, the idea of fragility and the topic of white guilt, like they both may come from like this academic analysis, but it's like the bigger reason that it gets such pushback is because it's an analysis of white people. So it's treated as this, oh, there's nothing wrong with whites. No, look, that's not how it works. And it's like, no, if you're going to talk about a racial hierarchy where there's a demographic who benefits from a lot of these systems, they're going to have very natural reactions to any type of change that way or the other. And so there is a inherent fragility. And where the guilt comes in, it's just a matter of like how the term functions. What is guilt? Like people talk about guilt as it's something you can impose on people. And it's like, not really. Guilt's something you feel if it's like, you feel like you did something wrong. And if you live in a society where you can believe to yourself personally, race isn't real, like it's not like a real thing, but you live in a world where anti-black violence happens all the time. Like how are you supposed to feel about your existence in that way? So it does become kind of like an internal contradiction.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Like there's a lot of pushback on it that's just really like, oh, so what? Like white people just have to like go off and like do all this work and blah, blah, blah. And like, that's going to lead to the revolution or whatever. And it's just like, what a weird way of like, yeah. Yeah, and it's just like, honestly, that would probably help a lot. That would probably help like a whole lot, actually. So like, I don't know, you know?
What, you expect me to get better? Yes, I do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, I do expect you to do some work on this because like, even like we're all learning and it's a journey that's never complete. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And like, you have to be able to realize that like, oh, like what I just did and said, like, it wasn't great. And like, I should rethink this. And like, I'm stalling the work actively right now with like my stance on this, you know? So.
But no, we've been talking for, I believe, over an hour. I don't have my clock with me, but I've been looking at the clock on and off. I don't want to go too long. I want to respect Mexie and all her spoons. So, was there anything you wanted to say kind of in closing?
No, just like, I just love getting to talk to you. I love following you. Like, I love your work. I've learned so much from you. And yeah, like you've like challenged me personally on a number of things where I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like that was right, you know? And so just like, I really appreciate that. Like, thank you for that. And I just hope you keep doing what you do. So.
Thank you. Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
You know, you play pretty well for someone with no real problems.
Yeah, but I don't feel any better.
The blues isn't about feeling better. It's about making other people feel worse and making a few bucks while you're at it.
It has always gone up and down. No matter how many times you've tried, you can break the yo-yo cycle. But I already know everything there is to know about diet.